anniversaries that we're in. When the 50th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, as we've seen, what has happened with the Supreme Court essentially eviscerating it. We're at the centennial anniversary of the release of a film called Birth of a Nation, and its implications are deeply unsettling. Like when we talk about this film, Birth of a Nation, we typically refer to D.W. Griffith's racist vision of the South. We focus mostly on his idea that in the post-slavery period, the post-bellum period in the South, there was this feckless, rapacious, immoral former slave leadership that came to the fore, and he depicts the Ku Klux Klan as the heroic, vision of American white manhood and masculinity that sweeps this scourge from the face of the South. And in that way, the kind of racism that's implicit on the face of it, we can kind of see like, okay, that's what this is. This is, kind of American racism writ large. But there are other things in that film that are kind of important to think about on the centennial of its anniversary, and one of which is that he proposed in that film essentially a kind of détente on the 50th anniversary of the Civil War, the end of the Civil War. He was proposing a kind of détente among Northern whites and Southern whites, that the lingering animus of the war could be resolved around their mutual contempt for black people. And one of the things that we tend to not recognize about Griffith is that he was largely right, that this did become the basis of national reconciliation, that when we saw the Great Migration and its relationship to the labor movements, and we're now looking at the centennial also of the World War I, and coming up the U.S. entry into World War I, and the way that these industrial forces transform what this country was, accelerate urbanization, accelerate the industrialization of the country, and all these dynamics that are let loose globally by the war, but then very specifically domestically, it is very much implicated in this Great Migration that we see of African Americans moving from largely southern rural environments into northern and industrial ones, and becoming integrated into this question of labor in a national way, as opposed to simply in the southern agricultural way. And so all these things are happening, and Griffith is really looking forward and saying that pretty soon the North will have the same sorts of problems with black people that we have had in the South, and that we can kind of reconcile. This can be the cement by which we bond the country, and that's why it's called Birth of a Nation. He's really talking about creating a new nation that is no longer sundered by the conflict of the Civil War, but now united in the cause of white supremacy, the common cause of white supremacy. And not the least of which is the 150th anniversary of the end of the Civil War. And so when we look at the Civil War, domestically and legislatively, we know, the kind of causes. Actually, I shouldn't say that. We know that that slavery is formative, is the active ingredient in the many dynamics that cause the Civil War. But I've been in kind of a disturbing number of environments where people will still kind of make this argument that slavery is not involved in the Civil War, is not that causal in the Civil War. But more or less, we can kind of understand this. And so these anniversaries and kind of what happened at these points in the past are deeply involved in kind of what we're looking at now. And also, I just want to make some connections between then and now, and perhaps we can see how the Fight for 15 and Black Lives Matter movements are related to deep historical trends that we should be aware of. So the Republican Party that comes into existence just prior to the Civil War, in a very short period of time creates this coalition that gains the presidency in this tremendously divisive election of 1860, and then goes on to advocate what we would now think of as kind of which moves essentially asking more for more of the same. When we look at the Tea Party and the kind of massive discontent that we've seen directed at problems that we can't actually point to anyone. When we see that there is this tanking of the economy, but no one's actually held accountable. There are no villains that are to be seen. Eduardo Bonilla Silva has the idea of racism without racists. We have a kind of national economic circumstance in which there is villainy without villains. And so these things are all directly connected. And I could make a more explicit connection to Black Lives Matter and the fight for 15, but I think I have like 1 minute left here, so I'm going to kind of make this connection. When we look at these kinds of questions, we like to think that class is the thing, that class is the kind of empirical, tangible idea. And there are these other ideas that are just kind of like, there's race, there's gender, there's all sorts of social difference, there's sexuality, but these are what we kind of group as identity politics, or we kind of sometimes derisively refer to as identity politics. But if we went back through this narrative, of labor and its history, we find it popping up in each circumstance. And we find these questions are not simply a matter of who you are or what you look like or who you love, but ways in which they are directly implicated in your relationship to the labor market. And so when we see the Wagner Act of 1935, and it excludes we see the Social Security Act, and it excludes domestic labor, and it excludes agricultural labor, farm labor. It is specifically excluding the types of labor that are done by African Americans, the two sectors in which African Americans are overwhelmingly concentrated. And so for me, a person who's a descendant of people who did domestic labor and did agricultural labor, my mother was a domestic worker both in Alabama and when she moved to New York during the Great Migration, you understand that these things are not abstract. That her exploitation as a woman, her exploitation as a Black person, and her exploitation as a worker were intricately connected, woven together. And that these things come, and when we look at now the concerns of who is subject to police violence, who is likely to be unemployed and underemployed, and who it is who's likely to bear stigma and be subject to all sorts of other social violence. These things, in essence, facilitate the same sorts of class questions, the big class questions that we are all deeply interested and concerned with. I'm going to stop here because I think that Alicia and Kendall can place kind of much more structure on this skeleton that I've just laid out, and I'm interested in hearing from both of them. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. Hey, can I take this thing off too? Cool. So if you're Bobby, I'm Whitney. You know? Yes, may she rest in peace. Okay, so I have a lot to say, and in 10 minutes we'll see what we can do. But first, I just want to say thank you for having me this morning, and I want to spend my time talking a little bit about who is Black Lives Matter. But before I start with that, I do want to acknowledge a couple of things. So one, I think it's really important to understand that Black Lives Matter has developed into something that is very complex. If you are in this room and you have organized or are organizing around issues relating to Black Lives Matter, can you stand up? Yes. You just keep standing. All right. So these are the real MVPs right here. So can we give folks love? And I start with that because I think it's important to kind of push against what often becomes a popular narrative of a founder, a leader, these folks who are doing this work in this city and in cities across the country and across the world are very much leaders of this movement. I also want to just spend some time talking a little bit about the contours of Black Lives Matter, as I mentioned earlier, and make sure that folks know that Black Lives Matter is much more than a hashtag. And that we didn't start Black Lives Matter as a hashtag. We started it as an organizing project, both being 3 organizers who work in multiple sectors. Myself, working at the intersections of racial, gender, and economic justice. Patrice, working at the intersections of police violence, mass incarceration, both inside and outside of institutions like jails and prisons, and then Opal, who's based here in New York, who has been working for years around the liberation of immigrants, and in particular, making visible the experiences and the complexities of immigration, meaning that there are Black immigrants, 500,000 here in the United States who are undocumented. So when we talk about Black Lives Matter, it's important for us to understand that Black Lives Matter is not only more than a hashtag, but it's about much more than policing. It's about much more than mass incarceration, and in fact, it's about much more than about much more than criminalization. It is very much about the ways in which anti-Black racism permeates every aspect of our society, and that's not just here in the United States, but that's global. Hi, Vinny. What's up, my homie? And so Black Lives Matter is a wide cross-section of Black people. Folks like to say, well, it's led by young people, where are the elders? And we like to say, well, we're intergenerational. We are leaderful, not leaderless, and that's an important distinction. And that even though we are intergenerational, we are youth-led, i.e. youth being the South African version of youth, right? Like 35 and under. No, I'm serious. And that Black Lives Matter is also multi-sector and cross-class. Yeah? All right, let's talk a little bit about this network. So as I mentioned, Black Lives Matter is 26 chapters internationally. So we have 24 chapters here in the US, 2 chapters internationally, one in Toronto, Canada, and the other one in Accra, Ghana. And then Black Lives Matter has come to be known as the moniker for a broader movement around the lives of Black people. Yeah? So Black Lives Matter, in as much as it's conceptualized, begins as an organizing project and then becomes the moniker for a much broader configuration of organizers, activists, individuals, families, institutions, etc. So I'm going to speak specifically to the network, but again, there are many people here that can talk to the contours of the movement as a whole. One thing I want to just lift up again is that we are multi-sector and quote-unquote multi-issue, although I don't like using multi-issue. Because again, what we are fighting around, right, are the contours of Black life. And what that looks like in our network, for example, is people who are doing work around policing and criminal justice. I should mention that all of those chapters are working on local campaigns in their areas and then are connected nationally and internationally. So policing and criminal justice, development, housing, and gentrification, gender justice, trans-liberation, economic justice, anti-austerity and privatization, climate justice, education, corporate accountability, and rights, dignity, and respect for lesbian, gay, and bisexual folks. And I do separate trans-liberation and lesbian, gay, and bisexual humanity, right? Because I think oftentimes we mix them when they are, in fact, quite complex and not one and the same. I think just to say the movement as a whole, if I were to give it some contours, which I feel hesitant to do, but I would say that the movement as a whole is also cross-sectoral and intergenerational, but certainly coalesced around the issues of criminal justice and mass incarceration. Yeah? And what crosses borders, right? What crosses the edges of how and where and why people are organizing, again, is around the contours of Black life, and in particular, fighting back against anti-Black racism, but also fighting for the dignity, humanity, and respect for all people, right? I appreciated Jelani's earlier comments about not wanting to boil this down to merely a class struggle. And it is important for us, both folks who are looking to build a better world, folks who are organizing to build a better world, that we understand that race is a contour that cannot be ignored. And that we understand, right, that as folks are fighting for their basic humanity, fighting for our basic humanity, that what that means for us, right, is the ability to walk down the street with our heads held high. It also means the ability to watch your children grow up to be adults. It means the ability to make decisions over your future. It means the ability to live in communities that are free of violence. It also means the ability to live in communities that have the resources that they need to survive. And it also means a shift in how we understand what we think this world can look like. So the contours thus far, I think, that we kind of come out of, right, in some ways have lost their anti-capitalist character. And what I would say, and what I feel incredibly proud of, is that for the network in particular, that there are visions beyond capitalism, right? And I'm not sure that folks in the BLM network would call themselves socialists necessarily, but I would say that most people will agree that capitalism is not the economic system that will get us to where we're trying to go. If I were to talk a little bit about the intersections between Black Lives Matter and the Fight for 15, and by the way, we'll see everybody here November 10th, right? Yeah, you better get excited about that. Y'all are like quiet. I don't know if you had coffee. I'm like excited about November 10th. I'm like, I don't know where I'm gonna be in the country, but I know I'm gonna be turned up somewhere, right? I think the Fight for 15 and this movement that is incredible is largely similar to Black Lives Matter in that it's cross-sectoral, right? And that the class character, however, I think is solidly working class. There's more of a multiracial character, as I understand it, in the Fight for 15 movement than there is in Black Lives Matter, although certainly there are affinity groups that have developed around Black Lives Matter. For example, we have a growing national group called Asians for Black Lives that is taking action both inside and outside of the labor movement to question the ways in which Asian Americans in particular are used as a wedge against the progress of African Americans. We can talk more about that in the Q&A. And I want to tell a story about the linkages between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Fight for 15, because we can't actually talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about a few things. One, the uprisings that occurred in Oakland after the murder of Oscar Grant. We can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about the uprisings that ensued when Trayvon Martin's killer was acquitted in 2013. And then certainly we can't talk about Black Lives Matter without talking about the uprisings that ensued in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed. I had the honor of spending just a little bit of time, 5 weeks or so, in Ferguson, Missouri, working with organizers and organizations on the ground there. And there were nightly protests in front of the Ferguson Police Department. And those protests were largely yet led by young Black people, largely led by young Black women, largely led by young Black queer women. And there was one woman in particular, Janina Jenkins, who was a leader in the Fight for 15 in St. Louis, Missouri. And she was also a frontline protester. She worked at McDonald's. And she was really clear about what the connection was, right? In fact, I would argue she was clearer than many of us were at that time. And I asked her, I said, well, how are you doing both things? So during the day, you're organizing for $15 in a union, and then at night, you're in front of the Ferguson Police Department. Why? What's the relationship? And she said to me two things. She said, one, when I was coming up in this community, and she, coming up, she was 19, right? But I let her have that. I was like, yeah, you coming up, She said, when I was coming up here in St. Louis, I used to believe that the role of police was to protect us. And then when I saw what happened to Mike Brown, and then when I saw that there was not only no response from the Ferguson Police Department, but in fact, a negative and almost condescending response, i.e., he deserved it, i.e., he's a thug, i.e., if he wasn't doing anything wrong, nothing would have happened to him. She said, when I saw that response, I became clear that the police here in this community don't care about us. The second thing she said to me was that she was clear that if we are able to rise up from poverty, that this changes the conditions in our local communities. That if we're able to rise up from poverty, then all kinds of other things become possible. So I take that with me. Right? And what I took from what Janina said was that essentially poor communities are underpaid and over-policed. Yes. And that too often poor communities are Black and brown. Let me end my comments, and I'm so excited for the discussion. I'm sorry we can't get into more in these 10 minutes, but I want to end my comments by talking a little bit about some of the dimensions of both movements and what I think the Fight for 15 movement and the movement for Black Lives have to offer and learn from one another. So the first thing that's important is that there is a high participation and high rate of leadership of Black women, Black queer people, Black trans people, and Black gender nonconforming people. And that's, again, and I appreciated you saying this, Jelani, it's not about identity politics, it's about our lives. That the very sanctity of our lives is at stake. And so, right, we have nothing to lose but everything to gain. And I think what's important about the high concentration and the high levels of participation is that what it signals is that there is space for people to be who they are unapologetically, right? And that there is space for us to fight amongst multiple dimensions at once, that we don't have to pick one. I don't have to be a worker today and a queer person tomorrow and a woman tonight, right? I can be all of those things all at once. Hallelujah. And this matters, right? Because when we look at incarceration and we look at who's being imprisoned, when we look at who's sitting in solitary confinement, when we look at why people are being jailed, right? Those contours sit at the intersections of race, class, gender, sexuality, and oftentimes nationality. I think things that we have to learn from one another include the importance of militant direct action. And I do mean militant, not just marches, not just rallies, but stopping business as usual. Again, the anti-capitalist and increasingly anti-imperialist trend that I think is arising through the Black Lives Matter movement and certainly has ebbed and flowed, I think, not in the Fight for 15 movement specifically, but in the labor movement as a whole, I think is an important thing to pay attention to, especially as, I'm going to be provocative here, just for fun, especially as we're finally and interestingly having somewhat of a conversation nationally around socialism, but we could ask, who's socialism? Yeah? Thanks, Vinny. Appreciate you, bud. Appreciate you, bud. Things we also have to learn from each other, what it means to act in an intersectional fashion. Having a gender analysis and a gender lens, I think, is a very important contour that we could kind of dig into. For example, I had the honor and the opportunity of speaking at one of the SEIU conventions in Oakland, and I talked a lot about how Black women have the highest participation in organized labor. We have the highest participation in organized labor. but we're severely, severely underrepresented in the leadership of organized labor, which is a challenge because Black women are at the lower end of the spectrum when it comes to wages, protections, benefits, safety net, etc. Got you. Lots more to say there. Potential and obstacles, I'll end with this. I think that Black Lives Matter offers a broad tent that allows many worlds to fit. And that's important. Have been doing this work for a long time, have been a part of many alliances, coalitions, new formations and organizations. There's probably been 1 million of them in my 15 years of organizing. And one thing that I know that we always are trying to do is figure out what's the silver bullet, and I don't think there is a silver bullet, but is there a big tent that we can all sit under and say, yeah, we understand why we're all here, right? And leveraging our strengths, right? To build the power that we need to make the transformations that we seek. At the same time, I think there's a question around whether or not Black Lives Matter is so broad that its contents and its politics actually get diluted. We have a lot of folks saying Black Lives Matter, but they're like, but we don't mean queer people, because the gay agenda and the Black agenda, they're different. Right? We have people doing that. We also have people doing the Black Lives Matter is about Black capitalism. You know what I'm saying? Y'all know what I'm saying. Come on now. We're not about Black capitalism. All capitalism sucks. And then I think there's a potential here in really investigating what is the potential and the benefit of having Black leadership at all levels of the movement. And then again, pushing the radical edges of what's possible because there is a political opening to do so. For a while now, we have been doing this, playing the politics of what's possible and compromising, right? Getting what we think we can get in this moment based on the current configuration of forces. Well, the reality is it's like Yahtzee, right? Like forces are all over the place now. And so how do we push more transformative demands beyond body cameras, right? Beyond body cameras to really attempting to drive a wedge into some of these systems that are causing our people so much misery. For example, can we move from a punitive system of incarceration where we literally lock away more than 1 million Black people in cages, 2.5 million people as a whole, nationally, more than anywhere else in the world. Can we move from that system to a restorative system? Y'all don't feel me though. We'll come back to that. Finally, the relationship between organized labor and Black folks has always been one where Black people have lent an increasingly radical edge to the labor movement and have provided, again and again, a compass for where the soul of this country should go. Always. And so, if we take our time and spend our time nourishing the participation, nourishing the linkages, I think that what we will see is that the sky is the limit. We'll talk more. Thank you.
Hello. How you doing? Great. So my name is Kendall. I'm the organizing director of the Fight for 15. So I'm gonna try to do this in 4 pieces, kind of the context that brought about the Fight for 15, go through the story of the Fight for 15 just so people understand it, talk like some concrete kind of involvement between the Fight for 15 and Black Lives Matter, and then next steps. So I think there's a lot of things that brought about the Fight for 15, but if I had to boil it down to 3, I would say probably number 1 is, the labor movement is dying or dead in this country, depending on who you ask. I think the second thing is the fastest growing jobs in this country are low-wage jobs. Jobs that don't have guaranteed hours, jobs with extremely low pay, jobs with no benefits, jobs with no unions or organizations to protect the workers. And then I would say the third point is that when you kind of look at the labor movement as a whole and look at all of these jobs and kind of where we're headed with jobs, that workers are looking for an outlet to get themselves in a better position, because jobs that were held by teenagers, like fast food jobs 20 years ago, they really were for 15, 16, 17-year-olds trying to get a new pair of tennis shoes or a book bag or some pocket cash. But now these low-wage jobs are really being held by adults. The average age of a fast food worker is about 28 years old. About 2/3 of them are women, and the average age of a woman is about 33 years old that works in fast food. So these are grown folks, mostly women, minority women who have children that are trying to figure out how to keep a roof over their head, how to keep food in their mouth, how to keep clothes on their back, working at jobs. Here in New York City, when we started in 2012, fast food workers were making $7.25. So you're making $7.25. You're not guaranteed hours. So this week you may work 7 hours. The next week you may have no hours. The next week you may have 10 hours. But at the end of the month, your bills are going to be the same. So, these jobs are now being held by adults that are trying to figure out how to actually survive. And I think those are kind of the three of the factors that brought about the Fight for 15. So I'm going to go to point 2 and just kind of talk about the campaign so that people kind of understand how it came about and what the Fight for 15 is. So back in 2012, an organization called New York Communities for Change, that's here in New York City, where they were out collecting signatures. Their platform is really around education, housing, and so they were trying to do a petition on affordable housing, collecting signatures from low-wage workers so they could follow up with them and kind of understand more about what we needed to do about affordable housing in New York City. So that happened at the beginning of 2012. Towards the summer of 2012, these community organizers started calling back all the numbers of these workers that they had collected and started to realize that the fast food workers, the conversations were just going different with them. And a lot of them, they couldn't even get to affordable housing because they were so far in poverty. A lot of them were living in homeless shelters. A lot of them were couch surfing, kind of sleeping on a cousin's couch one day, a friend's couch the next day, in the park the next day. But these are people who are working. And then just generally, they were just kind of on fire about the issues that were happening inside their store. So I was sent up here in about August of 2012 to see if we could pull together a meeting of fast food workers to just see what would happen if we brought, fast food workers from all these major brands across New York. So the workers were really from Burger King, McDonald's, Wendy's, Domino's, Papa John's, et cetera, kind of the bigger brands. So in September, we pulled together the first meeting. We had fast food workers from all across New York, from Manhattan, from Harlem, from Brooklyn, et cetera, from all the brands. We probably had about 40 or so workers in the room. I would say the first meeting was really enlightening because I think it's probably the first time that fast food workers were in a room with a lot of different fast food workers from a lot of different companies in different parts of the city, all in one room talking about one thing. And so really 3 things came out of that. I would say it was more of an issues conversation. Really what came out of it was the disrespect that happens at these stores. There were 2 women at the first meeting. One woman had just gotten fired for eating a chicken nugget. She was on the job. She was hungry, went to the back, tried to, put a chicken nugget in her mouth, got fired. There was another woman who had just gotten fired for drinking water out of a medium cup instead of the small water cup. So she had just been fired for that. And that's just kind of just a taste of just the disrespect. These workers would be fired for anything. So that was one thing that came out. The other thing was the wages. People were making $7.25, but it was interesting because some workers had just, I just started in fast food. I've been there for 2 months. I make $7.25. You have other workers who've I've been at this same store for 8 years. I make $7.25. You have other workers that's over the last 10 years, I bounced around to 5 stores. I make $7.25. And so I just think that light bulbs were going off in the room wow. I think people's context was that in my store, I know what happens, but I don't know what happens in the Papa John's way in Brooklyn. I'm way in Harlem. So the pay, the disrespect, and then the hours were a huge issue because people just wouldn't know what hours they were going to work each week. So every time people got paid, their checks would vary, and it makes it hard to pay the bills. So what the workers said is they wanted to go back, talk to some of their coworkers and see if we could do a second meeting. We did a second meeting, probably was about double the size, and that's where people really decided that 15 was the number. They went back and forth. That people thought that 20 would be hard to accomplish. They were making $7.25 at the time, and that 10 wouldn't matter. that it wouldn't change their life significantly. And that's kind of how folks agreed that if they had $15 an hour, would probably be just enough to get food, be able to keep a roof over your head, and be able to feed yourself and feed your children. And so the third meeting was really about how do we, if we want $15 an hour and we want the reunion part really came about because of the disrespect in the hours. People were like, and it's New York City, I think people just had a better understanding of unions and workers kind of coming together. They've seen it a lot here. I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. It's just not the same context, kind of the unions in Kansas City. So, the third meeting was like, how could we get 15 in the union? And really what it came down to, people said, what's the most drastic thing that we could do? And it was strike. I would just say at the time, people thought we were crazy. Like, not a little crazy, but like literally crazy. Like, you are the dumbest person I've ever seen in my life. If you think that fast food workers who make $7.25 will ever make $15, you are delusional. And if you think that they're gonna get a union, you're crazy and you're dumb, because you're gonna try to take these workers out on strike and none of them are gonna get back into work because the fast food restaurants won't let them. Why would they let them back in? You just said a woman got fired for eating a chicken nugget and for drinking out of a medium cup. Now they're going to go on strike and think they're going to walk back into work the next day. People who go on strike typically have the union. People don't go on strike to get the union, and so, the workers who were in the room were willing to go on strike and bring as many workers as they could out. So the first strike was November 29th, 2012. It's 200 fast food workers from 30 stores across New York City that went on strike, meaning they were on the schedule to go to work and did not show up to work and were all out in front of their stores and in the community. I would say they had broad support from religious leaders, from city council members, from state politicians, from people who were just in the community, and people came out to support the strike lines. So it wasn't like 40 workers out there. It was 150 people out there because these workers brought out people from their neighborhoods, and clergy came out. Ended up being a pretty big deal. Like, every media outlet in the country was out there. Everybody from CNN and New York Times to, NPR, everyone else. So these workers weren't as stupid as people thought, because they ended up, on the TV and on the radio everywhere in the country. My mother called me from Kansas City, like, the fast food workers are on TV. And so that's when I knew that, we were on to something when mama calls. So we had the first strike on November 29th. I would just say it was a huge success. And so kind of as the adrenaline dropped from the first strike, we realized we had to get people back into work the next day. 199 workers got into work the next day, fine. Really what happened is you would have a store of 30 or so folks where 4 people struck. They would come back in the next day, maybe with a delegation of 40 people, being led by a clergyman or being led by a clergywoman or being led by a politician, that would call the manager to the front counter and say, look, these are my friends. They went on strike yesterday to get out of poverty. We don't expect any nonsense. They better get back on the schedule and they better be back into work. And people got back in and was fine. We had one Burger King in Brooklyn on Fulton Mall where we were, this delegation was being led by Jelani Williams. A young lady went in ahead of the delegation because we were like 2 minutes late. And so she didn't want to be late to work. When she went in and tried to clock in, the GM said, you're fired. What? You're fired for a no-call, no-show yesterday. You can get out of my store. We're literally walking in behind her. She tells Jelani that she was just fired. Jelani starts to talk to the customers in the store, explaining this young lady has a child. She was just fired to get out of poverty. People started leaving the store. So at this point, 30 of us in the store. The store's pretty packed. It becomes difficult to do business as usual. So they call the cops and we have to leave. So we're outside the store. Everyone in the delegation's on their phone calling anybody that they could call to tell them to come up here to the store. I would say the crowd probably grew from 30 to about 125 people in about 45 minutes. The general manager comes out, gives the young lady her job back. Has to be the fastest hire and fire in American history. And I think that's significant because it set the tone. It set the tone with employers, I think, across New York. First off, because people realized at that point that this wouldn't just be a fight with these 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 workers that struck from the store. This would be an actual fight with people in your community. And it's hard when kind of in fast food, if you're in a fight with the people in the community where your store, it makes it difficult to do business as usual, which is why I think she got her job back. So that was the success of the first strike, which was November 29th of 2012. Without going through every tidbit, I'll just fast forward to the end of 2013. So about a year later, we were in 100 cities across the U.S. With fast food workers going on strike. People had heard about the first strike, reached out through Twitter and Facebook, et cetera, and New York workers went to other cities and talked to fast food workers about striking. And so we had fast food strikers from about 100 different cities by the end of 2013. By the end of 2014, we were in 230 cities across the U.S. Plus, in May of 2014, we went international, 40 different countries, about 230 cities where, workers, fast food workers were out in support of U.S. fast food workers getting a union. Some workers, like in Denmark, they're already in the union. They're fast food workers in the union, but they realize that if U.S. workers are in the union, then that's going to give them more strength. Other places where fast food workers are not in the union, people were fighting because they realize if fast food workers in the U.S. get $15 in a union, it increases the chances of getting higher wages in their countries. So, the movement had gone international, 230 cities across the U.S. And, and I would just say there's been a total shift in the country. The conversation, I could pick a few highlights. Governor Cuomo, here in New York State, I would say probably far from a liberal thinker when it comes to wages for low wage workers typically. But as workers make demands, as people get emotions, politicians begin to change their view. Next thing you know, Governor Cuomo's picked up an antiquated system called a wage board, dusted it off, and before you know it, 150 to 200,000 fast food workers in New York State have $15 an hour across the state. And if you look in California, minimum wage in LA moved to 15. Minimum wage in Seattle moved to 15. Even in Kansas City, 13 by 2020. You see minimum wages going up by dollars. You look at the Democrats, the president wasn't even at 9 when we started this campaign. Now the Democrats have adopted 15. And I could go on and on and on. I would just say that I think the fight for 15 and the courage of these workers has shifted the politics in this country. And I think what it boils down to is these are low-wage workers. They work in iconic workplaces. They were brave enough to go on strike, walk off the job, talk about the issues and what's happening in their life. This is a $200 billion industry. It's one of the wealthiest industries in the world. McDonald's is the second largest private employer in the world. So it's not like these companies don't actually have the money to pay these workers, and these workers are so far in poverty that they're so courageous that it's like, what's the worst thing that could happen? If I go on strike, I'll get fired. Well, apparently I'll get fired for just walking in work a minute late or saying something back to my manager anyway. So it's like, get fired for not going on strike or get fired for being a part of this. And I know that I have all these people in the community that support me. And that is kind of just how the campaign has spread. I would also say, over time, home care workers have joined the fight for 15. Child care workers have joined the fight for 15. Some cities, retail workers have joined the fight for 15. Convenience store workers have joined the fight for 15. All these workers, taking huge risks with their jobs and going on strike, some nationally, some inside their cities. Adjunct professors have joined the fight for 15, fighting for $15,000 a credit course. All of this, I think, is coming about because of the low wages that people are experiencing in the country right now. And then to go to my third point about the, kind of some concrete intersections between Black Lives Matter and the fight for 15, Alicia touched on it. If you go to Ferguson, Missouri, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri. When things happened in Ferguson, the McDonald's that was essentially ground zero for Ferguson, that was a McDonald's where all those workers had been going on strike for the fight for 15 for about 2 or 3 strikes. So when Michael Brown was murdered, a lot of the workers who have gained organizing skills through the fight for 15. I mean, you have to think about it. A lot of these workers, you're either an activist or a leader. If you're a leader, it means you're in the store, you have influence over others, and your courage is what makes other people in your store go on strike because they follow you. If you're an activist, you're a person that goes on strikes. But essentially, this is built off of leadership within the store amongst the workers. And so a lot of the workers who are bringing people on strike use their same skill set to start bringing people out in their community for the fight in Ferguson, bringing people out in their store for the fight in Ferguson. Some of our workers completely stopped working in McDonald's and became a full-time Ferguson freedom fighter, like Janina, like Justin Johnson, Skillet, all these other workers who were huge leaders in the fight for 15, learned how to organize through the fight for 15 and bring people on strike and use that same skill set to better their community, because these workers still have to walk to, they're the same workers who get harassed by police walking to work. They're the same workers that get harassed walking through their neighborhood and driving. People's lives are multidimensional, and so people are dealing with issues on a multidimensional level. If, I would say the same thing in New York when the Eric Garner murder happened. It was Fight for 15 workers were out pulling people out of their stores to the protests, organizing people in their neighborhood. They know how to get people's issues. They know how to get people mobilized, and they know how to get people in the street because they've been taking workers on strike out of their store, which is probably one of the highest bars because you could potentially be fired for walking out of the store, except for these workers have so much support now that they always get back in. But it's still a scary thing to think. Anybody in here that has a job, you think about, would you walk off your job and then walk back in and look your manager in the eyes the next day and say, hey, I'm here? Like, it's a very difficult thing to do. And even if you look at the shootings in South Carolina, Fight for 15 workers were out there, front line, bringing out people in the community, bringing out co-workers from their stores, speaking on what's happening. I just think that there's a natural intersection. If you look at any of the cities where these strikes have been happening, every city has a coalition table, and almost all of our tables and all of our workers are linked into Black Lives Matters or other groups that are affiliated with Black Lives Matter, and actually, they do actions together. They plan things together. You heard Alicia talking about November 10th. November 10th is going to be a national day of action with immigration groups, with Black Lives Matter, with Fight for 15 workers, home care workers, child care workers, all coming together to make a statement as we head into 2016, which is a huge opportunity to create change in this country based off of making demands on the ground. I think one thing that I've learned through the Fight for 15 is when people get in motion and people have a clear demand on the ground and people are willing to do whatever it takes to get their demand, things will shift accordingly. And there was a time where people said these workers were crazy, $15 would never happen, this was the dumbest thing that anyone had ever seen. Now fast food workers in New York State have $15, all various places in California, low-wage workers have $15. Seattle, all over the country, wages are increasing by dollars now. There was once a conversation like, should minimum wage be $7.25 or $7.50? And this is like a big debate, like this is a huge debate. Now you see minimum wages going up from $7.50. Essentially, there is a de facto minimum wage in New York State right now. If fast food workers are making $15, why would I work at Dwayne Reed for $8? Like, you don't have to be Cornel West to figure this out. You know what I mean? Like, if the lowest paid workers are making $15, it's going to shift the economy, and low wage employers are going to have to pay. Every employer is going to have to pay people more money in order to keep their staff there. So I just think that the intersection between what's happening with Black Lives Matter and what's happening with the Fight for 15, it's a natural intersection. I think that we have a moment of time here in this country, and that if we take advantage of it and we link these movements together and continue to make demands on the ground, that we will be able to shift things. We already have successes, I think, amongst these movements, and I think we have opportunity to create more successes in years to come. So thank you.
I want to make sure that we have time to get questions in. I know that a lot of people have questions here. I'm going to ask just a couple questions, and then we're going to just kind of open this up to the broader conversation. One is that one of the most notable. Okay, maybe some sound control. Yeah. Come up here. Yeah.
It's not even on.
It's not on? Okay, I don't know what that is then. So one of the most notable things I thought about the Democratic debate, I mean, there were a lot of notable things about that debate, but one of the most notable things I thought was, can we get, oh, is it me? Okay, let me. I'm trying to, I don't have a volume button on here. All right, can you hear me? Yeah. All right, let's just try. So the question that was posed to the candidates about whose lives matter, that was something that was directly, we could see kind of the direct fingerprints of the movement in that question being posed. And I wonder, what are the mechanisms that are, and both for Black Lives Matter and the Fight for 15, for this upcoming election, there's a great deal of leverage to be gained on these questions. But what are the ideas about what happens after that? Like, is there a means of saying, how do we secure these things once we have got a point where candidates are actually responding? And interestingly enough, when Martin O'Malley, when he had the question about Black Lives Mattering, you could almost see him about to say all lives matter. It was like right there, like on the tip of his tongue, and then he was fighting with himself, like, no, don't say that. Even if I really feel that way. And so, but that was the conversation that we had. But I wonder what comes next with this.
I'm scared to turn this on.
Okay.
We good?
Yeah, I think so.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Ooh, technology. It is our friend. So a couple things about the debate and where we go from here. So, it says something about the state of politics that our victory, one of our victories, is actually getting presidential candidates to acknowledge that we're human beings. Like, let's just sit with that for a second, right? And then to be honest with you, as I was watching, on and off that debate, because I can only stomach so much of that stuff, I'm like, ooh, this is serious. The thing I kept thinking to myself was, it's interesting because that's the lowest bar. And I think that, whether they like it or not, they're actually setting the stage for more disruption. And what I mean by that is not just disruption in the streets, but I do think what that's showing to the rest of the country is like, if we're having this hard of a time getting leaders of the quote-unquote free world to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, right, then we're going to have a really hard time, right, getting folks to build consensus around how do we de-incarcerate the Black community? How do we make sure that we're lifting the floor for Black folks and then shattering the ceiling, right? So the thing that we're concerned with at this point is making sure that we are kind of healing some of the fractures that exist in our communities so that we can be organized, and then also figuring out what's it going to take for us to coalesce around an agenda that goes beyond 2016, right? That we can continue to fight around, and how do we do that in a way that really pushes the transformational edge of what's possible yet again? Because to be frank with you,
Alicia doesn't need that preface.
listen,
Alicia doesn't really need that preface, but
just to keep it 100, right? So, we had Netroots Nation, right, where it was a struggle to get any candidate to say Black Lives Matter. And it wasn't just about them saying that Black Lives Matter. We should just be really clear about that. It was actually about the fact that they came to the largest kind of progressive gathering in the country, right? The largest progressive democratic gathering in the country, and did not acknowledge at all a murder that had happened just a few days before with Sandra Bland. Right? And so the contours there are that we have a party that Black folks are fiercely loyal to, like just check the box down the way, be like Democrat all the way. But we're getting very little in return. Yeah, we're getting very little in return. So our plans for the rest of this period and beyond 2016 are to build bases in the communities where we're located, to expand where we're located, and to try and coalesce around an agenda that we can use to fight for bigger and better victories. And quite frankly, I think what that's going to take is a deeper level of collaboration between Black Lives Matter, the Fight for 15, climate justice movement, the immigrant rights movement, and on, right? To also see where is it that we intersect, that we can use our muscle to really push some stuff through. Final thing I'll just say on that is that it does feel very much, at least to the folks that I'm in contact with, that we need a new way of doing politics in this country. Like, we're really concerned about feeling like, we're being asked to give up something and getting nothing in return, and we don't think that's going to shift after 2016, right? So we're also trying to figure out how do we open up democracy and what it really and truly is supposed to be and look like, so that folks have more access to decision-making over our futures.
Yeah, I mean, I just would add that I just think what I've learned is that politicians don't lead, they follow. And that, politicians read polls. We're trying to figure out how to be the poll and move the poll, because that's what's going to move politicians into action at the end of the day. And so what I think it's going to take is, I think it's going to take more collaboration between the movements. I think it's going to take more people in the streets, and I think it's going to take more disruption so that we can move the poll, because as politicians do their polling and they see that Black Lives Matter is polling high, when they see the fight that higher wages is polling high, then you're going to hear politicians talking about it. And when it's not polling high and when it's not an issue and people don't know about it, then they're not going to talk about it. I think we have the momentum on our side. I think that politicians are in a place now when they're trying to figure out what's going to happen, because these movements can mobilize so many people. And I think that that's our strength, and I think that's what we need to utilize across the country in all of our major cities, so that all of these politicians, whether they're running for dog catcher or running for the president of the United States, not only speaks about it, but that they know that when they get into office, they're going to have to deal with it, or else we're going to mobilize even more people to make sure that they deal with it. And I think that's really what it comes down to.
So on this question of mobilization, there's this curious kind of thing that there's been something on the kind of social landscape and certainly in the economic landscape that's been surprising to me, something I did not think that I would actually see, and that has been in terms of the demonization of public sector unions, that even in the kind of prevailing anti-labor sentiments, it's hard to imagine that people would be able to get away with effectively demonizing firefighters. Right. Or people be able to get away with effectively demonizing police unions, given that these are people who pride themselves on being law and order type of figures. But we've seen both of those things happen, as well as the kind of demonization of teachers' unions, which has happened before, but for a longer history of that. But nonetheless, there's this rhetoric, there's a dynamic around deservingness that I've certainly heard come up in the fight for 15. And I wonder if you could respond to that, this idea that is more broadly accepted than one would imagine, that why do these people deserve $15 an hour, and how you all have had to kind of encounter and deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, some people, like, you're not going to win over Republicans. There's not going to be a Republican, more than likely, that's going to come out and say fast food workers should make $15 and they should be in the union. Like people that are against there's 64 million low-wage workers in this country who make less than $15 an hour, about 43% of all the workers in this country. So almost half the workers in this country make $15 or less. So, somebody that's making $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year saying that someone doesn't deserve to make 15, I just don't think it's relevant. But, if you look at a poll of those 64 million workers, unions are polling over 70%. And I think that, the growth of this movement, starting off with fast food workers and then expanding to home care workers and child care workers, and just the growth of it across the country and around the world shows that we're on the right path and we're doing the right thing, and we are having successes. When you're having successes, you're going to have people that are not happy with what you're doing. But if you look at the facts of the matter, Democrats have picked up 15. Rahm Emanuel went to 13. Governor Cuomo went to 15 for fast food workers. $15 in LA, $13 in Kansas City, $10 in Birmingham, Alabama. Like, we are raising wages across over 13 million workers in this country have received over $1 raise. Even union members are now benefiting from the mobilization of non-union workers. So non-union fast food workers, home care workers, child care workers, et cetera, have created an environment where John Hopkins workers who have been in the union for years and typically made $1 or $2 more than minimum wage put 15 on the table and won it. LA Unified School District, second largest school district in the country. Typically, those jobs have been, they're in the union, $1 or $2 above minimum wage, put 15 on the table and won it. Employers like Amalgamated Bank went to 15 on their own. Facebook went to 15 on their own. So clearly, I would just say, if you really want to look at the facts of the matter are these low-wage workers are changing this country. And there's a small minority of people with a lot of airtime, whether it's radio, TV or written press that have the opportunity to say that these workers don't deserve $15 and they should live in homeless shelters and they shouldn't have guaranteed hours and they deserve no benefits. And I just don't think that any of that is worth recognizing when you see that the majority of folks that have the power to create change in this country. Look, there was just a White House, President Obama just did a summit for low-wage workers at the White House. I think this was 2 weeks ago. Terrence Wise, probably one of our biggest leaders from the Fight for 15, introduced the President of the United States of America. This Terrence Wise is a fast food worker from Kansas City, Missouri that works at McDonald's and Burger King, had the opportunity to introduce the President of the United States of America. And I just think that that shows the power of this movement and the power of workers when they get in motion. So I just don't think that the critics of this campaign deserve any airtime because the facts are so overwhelming that these workers are winning.
So I think the microphone is here. I remember there was a person in the back, and there's someone here who has a question. In the black hat here.
It's gotta be on green and I've tested it on green. Okay.
Having grown up in the era of Stokely Carmichael, Angela Davis, Soledad Brothers, and Eldridge Cleaver, to me, there is hardly a difference between the Black Power movement and Black Lives Matter, but nobody here seemed to have linked them. The only difference then was that there weren't so many people being killed by police. But isn't it the same fact that there is still no dignity after all these years that people don't believe that Black people should have dignity? Isn't that what's causing the whole thing? And how do I know that when I'm dead and gone, in another conference 30 years from now, we have a new slogan? There's absolutely no difference, I think, between the Black Power movement then and Black Lives Matter now, and you guys haven't linked it to see that we have hardly progressed. And also to Mr. Phelps, what about there's a drawback with the $15? I don't know if Angela saw, sorry, Alicia, there's somebody who wrote an open letter to people in New York. I don't know if anybody else read it, where the owners of the fast food restaurants are getting their own back, in that the more people got money, the more people moved out of poverty, working maybe 10 hours at $15. Their benefits were lowered or negated, and people were saying, can you give me less hours? And the managers were saying, no, I won't, because you asked for this, live with it. I don't know if you knew of that, Mr. Phelps. So is there something to counteract this? Because the more people are going to be getting $15 an hour, and the more they're going to be having more hours, then welfare will be cut or whatever, food stamps.
So we want to make sure we get to questions. So the questions are about the linkages between Black Lives Matter and the Black Power movement, and why that hasn't been elucidated, as well as whether this is just kind of a cyclical thing that we're continuing to do without making progress. And the other is about $15 an hour drawbacks, and whether or not this winds up being given with one hand and taken with the other.
I have lots to say after you.
Yeah, I mean, on the drawbacks of 15, I think, you know, what these franchisors, so, you know, the way that McDonald's is set up, there's the franchisor, McDonald's, the corporation, and then there's, you know, Kendall Fells that owns a McDonald's for a couple of $1 million, and then it's the actual workers. You know, the actual franchise owners they have much more in common with the workers than they do with the franchisor. So in California, we just passed a bill that essentially is going to help franchisees have more power to actually run their stores and have just more autonomy as a small business owner. The truth of the matter is that McDonald's, Burger King, like the $200 billion industry called the fast food industry is going to have to figure out what their relationship needs to be with their franchisee in order to make sure that these workers can make $15. It's not the responsibility of the workers to figure out how, you know, a $200 billion industry needs to move around money to deal with franchisees, et cetera, to get workers $15. No one knows what these workers need more than these workers. They have been on TV, they've been in the newspaper, they've been everywhere. These workers know that they need $15 an hour in order to keep a roof over their head, food in their mouth, and clothes on their back. Everything else needs to be worked out by the employer in order to make that happen. And that's just what our position is on it. What is a fact is that there is more than enough money for these workers to get $15 an hour and have a full-time schedule. More than enough money, and these corporations would still be extremely profitable.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I guess what that raises to me, and then this gets to your question about the linkages and even some of the differences between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Black Power movement, and the big question about what's changed, right? I think in order for any of the wins that are being won by Fight for 15 or Black Lives Matter, or even, back in the day with the Black Power movement, to be sustained requires a couple of different things. One, it does actually require a dialectical relationship between policy and common sense. Yeah? And what I mean by that is, of course, corporations are going to try to figure out a way to absorb, right, what is a big hit in some ways to their profit margin, but it's actually more so a big hit to how they are helping to govern. Yeah, and so the earlier question about, well, what about people who are demonizing public sector unions and saying people don't deserve $15 an hour? That's actually an intentional project. That's an intentional project by the right wing and right wing conservatives, right? To get people to buy into some people having a whole lot and other people having next to nothing, right? And so the reason that I wouldn't say that nothing has changed, actually, since the Black Power movement, I do think that things have gotten worse in a lot of ways. But I think that what that represents is actually the consolidation of a certain level of common sense on the other side, right, that many of us adopt. Okay, so even when we're talking about wage increases, even when we're talking about regulations for industries, even when we're talking about benefits for caregivers, right, people who care for the people who we care for the most, it is an ideological struggle as well as a material one. And that's where the organizing comes in. And that's why, right, it's not enough for us to just be in the streets. We actually do need to organize so that we can build a consensus. And I 100% agree with you. You're not going to win everybody over, right? But our fight actually is to win over the folks who this is in their interest and they're working against their interests. Yeah? So to me, there's lots more that we could say about, how folks don't vote their interest, right? But I just want to kind of lift that up because in some ways I feel like in comparisons between movements of the 50s, 60s, and 70s and movements of today, we often kind of individualize like where the failures come from, and I think that they're systemic and they're not individual. And then the other piece that I just want to kind of lift up here is that I actually think there's different economic conditions today than there were during the Black Power movement. And so it's not surprising to me, right, that we would have another upsurge that is both around racial justice and economic justice and gender justice and climate justice, because a lot of the things that folks were fighting for and won were intentionally dismantled and rolled back. And so that's the context in which we're living, yeah? And so we're both fighting to get back the things that we won, but we're also fighting for stuff that's bigger than that. So that's where we're at today.
We had a question that was in the back, and we're kind of short on time, so what we can do is this. If we can get, was the person in the back still there? Okay, well then we can get this question, these two questions here. If you can ask your questions sequentially, and we can answer both of them, and then maybe we could get both of these questions in because we're kind of running short on time. So it's the woman in the aquamarine, I guess that is.
It's a nice color.
Hoodie, yeah. I mean, they just, Martin O'Malley Martin O'Malley had hoodies on his website that they were tweeting. Did anybody see this?
I can't.
They were actually trying to, like, Martin O'Malley, the zero tolerance mayor of Baltimore, was tweeting, "Buy my hoodie," which was, I mean, sort of surreal, bizarre things that happens here. So there's a question here and a question here, and then we'll try to get both of these questions in.
I just don't want it.
Hi, I think this is an incredibly fascinating and important topic, the two and the intersection of the two. I think a couple of things. It's clear that people are multifaceted. They're not just one thing. But I believe that it's really only the working class that can encompass the entirety of what human beings are about and fight for the dignity of all human beings, which is why I think the working class, I thought your discussion was incredibly interesting about how the fast food workers had become the leadership in Ferguson and other places in terms of fighting about police brutality. And I think that we have to take a lesson from that, and that we have to look to the working class as being the leadership of all of these struggles. But also the fact is that, and not look to the Democratic Party, because it's clear that the Democratic Party is just another bourgeois party that's going to only support the needs of the bosses. And that what we absolutely need is not only a fight for 15, but we need an organized trade union movement that is going to encompass both workers who are employed and unemployed, and people in DC 37, which is the major union in New York City. They make less than $15 an hour also, and these people are unionized. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the trade union leadership has really not advanced the struggle. And I think it's going to take people like the fast food workers to really push those people along as well. But I think it's really only socialism that's going to allow for the entirety of human beings to live their lives in dignity, and that as long as we live in a capitalist society and we have multi-class sort of struggle, then we're not going to really see the question of class. We're not going to fight for socialism, and that capitalism will be, that we're going to be able to think that capitalism...
Can we summarize your point?
Okay.
Right.
Okay, so two things. I think socialism really needs to be on the agenda, and my question is, has the fast food workers approached the Central Labor Council in order to push them forward to fight for decent wages for all workers?
So socialism and, right, okay, we have a question, okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
My name is Myra Hepburn.
Hey.
I'm a business rep and organizer with Office and Professional Employees International Union.
Hold the mic up.
Here,
Yeah,
can't hear me? Okay. I have a question. My main question is, how can we in labor here in New York City be of help with combining these movements? Marvin Holland from TWU is going to be doing a panel next week on Monday, and I'm going to be one of the labor leaders that will be here to help address these issues, but we really need to get our rank and file members involved, and I think that it's really important. It's sort of a feed off to what she was saying, but in a different level. There's a lot of people who have the issues. It's just a matter of how we get them organized to get them involved with the movement.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Should we take one more?
Oh, I think we have to get these two questions in before we get the cane yanking us off stage.
Which one? I forgot this question.
Oh, no. I think this question was about should socialism be on the agenda and have the Fight for 15, have they approached, was
The Central Labor Council.
Central Labor Council, right.
Employed and
Right,
unemployed.
right.
Right. So yeah. So I'm gonna try to answer both of these together. So yes, in all the states and cities that the fast food workers are in, they're approaching the Central Labor Council, every union, etc. It's just hard, Like, look, this is, in my opinion, what it comes down to for the labor movement is, you have unions that have 16,000, 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 members. And my personal opinion is that institutions are going to have to start putting resources into mobilizing their members. I think that it's a little bit concerning that you have 150,000 or 20,000 members and you can only get 50 of them out to something. And it takes resources. It means you have to pull your members together shop by shop. You have to send someone there to have serious conversation. You can't hand out flyers. You have to sign them up and you have to follow up with phone calls. You have to figure out how to get people out to act. Like it's a 1, 2, 3, like you have to check all the boxes and you will mobilize more people. But this idea that it's like, oh, we support X, we support Black Lives Matter, we support the Fight for 15, let me bring 10 people out to this action, even though I have 75,000 members, it's just not gonna work because if we're not having conversations with our members about what's happening in the streets, what the future looks like for them, why they can't win at the bargaining table, et cetera, and what they need to do in order to win for themselves. If we're not having those type of conversations in the labor movement, what kind of conversations are we having? So yes, our fast food workers are going to all of these, kind of umbrella groups to get unions out. But a lot of times what folks want to do is like, oh, I'm gonna go through my shops and hand out the flyers and then we're gonna see who shows up. Well, I'm gonna tell you, I'm not a prophet, but nobody's gonna show up because all you did was hand out some flyers. But if you are getting people signed up and you're following up with phone calls and you're bringing people out and you're providing buses to get people there and et cetera, and having a conversation with people, a broader conversation about what, even though you make $22 an hour, what this means for you, because you may have a little bit of power now that you think is a lot because no one has any, but you're going to lose everything just like everyone else. And so we all need to be out in the streets and we all need to be trying to figure this out together. And I think that's what we're trying to get to with many of the labor unions. Some of them are absolutely there, and then a lot of them are still like, I'm gonna put my head in the sand and kind of try to protect what I have, but that's not you're not protecting what you have. You're either growing or you're shrinking, and right now we're shrinking.
I wish we had more time because we could have a lot of more conversation about strategy. I agree with you theoretically, and then practically, I think the question is, how do we get there? And I think that we live in a country where people haven't been won over to socialism yet. So what do you do with them? It's a legit question. I don't think you win by telling people. You don't win by handing newspapers. You don't win by giving them the theoretical arguments. You don't, right? And so I think we could have a lot of conversation about that. But what I would say is this is a moment to push a more radical politic, but it also has to look like something in practice. People have to feel it. They have to feel like, oh, this fits me. This isn't something that somebody with a fanny pack and a newspaper is talking to me about, right? I identify as a socialist, and as I'm talking to people, right, there's an image that folks have that's also part of the neoliberal project. Yeah? So we have to kind of get in there in practice, right, and move people from wherever we can move them. So that's one piece. And I would say even amongst working class folks who are organized, I don't think there's a socialist politic. So how do we grapple with that? I want to grapple with the real-time questions. I think there's conversations that we could have about whether or not it's possible to break off some of the different class strata to unite with the working class. And I think many theoreticians have said that's actually part of the project. I would agree with that. And then the other piece that I think we could have a lot of debate about is the usefulness or utility of the Democratic Party. I'm not a Democrat, but I do think that it requires an inside and an outside strategy to move and transform the Democratic Party. It's not a monolith. It's not a monolith. And I feel like we have to figure out where do we have allies and where do we not. And I think, for me, I'll be voting particular ways. But I do think that what's useful in this next period is to push the rest of our country around this democratic system that we supposedly operate within. And I think that what I've read, right, is that a lot more people are disheartened and feel not connected to a two-party system, but we haven't done the organizing necessary to move people in a different direction. When I go into Black communities and organize with my folks, right, I can't say, it's hard for me to say, don't vote Democrat. That's what people do. Now, we can, over time, right, expose the contradiction, but it takes a level of engagement that is deeper than ideology, and it also takes an alternative that people feel like is viable for their lives.
We have a question here about how Was it how New York?
Oh, yeah.
New York City labor unions.
How New York City labor unions can help, right?
November 10th is a National Day of Action.
Well, with both movements.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know.
November 10th is a National Day of Action. If people want to help, we need people to mobilize. We need people to, look, I hope I don't get in trouble for this. Like, look, I mean, I think like these panels are great, and I think all the discussion is great, et cetera. But oftentimes, just to be honest, it's like, I feel like we do this stuff and then we leave and then everybody just goes back to, it's like, I
Well,
just,
see, that's my point. That's what I don't want to do.
Yeah.
That's why I'm
Question.
trying to get people involved, my rank and file is involved. So it's not about just talking, it's about doing it. But
Yep.
we want to make sure
So-
we're doing it together.
yeah, so we're doing ally meetings. We've been doing ally meetings every other week. I can give people the information. I don't want to, do it on a video. But we want to get as many people to these as many labor unions, other organizations, individuals, et cetera, to help plan out what's going to happen November 10th in New York State. And, if people want to help the fast food workers, Black Lives Matter, and, this is a National Day of Action and convergence among all the movements. It's not a Fight for 15 Day of Action. It's for immigration groups. It's for Black Lives Matter. It's for home care workers. It's for child care workers. It's for fast food workers. People are coming out in large numbers to make an impression. And so if people want to be helpful, then that's what people can do November 10th. If you don't remember anything else, November 10th, National Day of Action. And I'm going to sit here until everyone's gone so I can give people information so that no one can say that they didn't get the information before they left. So.
I can add just really quickly. Nice sticker. Yes. I think there's lots of stuff that you can do in addition to November 10th, and you should definitely mobilize for that. One of the things that I feel like we have to kind of break apart, and I think that Fight for 15 has done this really well, is this real separation between labor and community. You know what I'm saying? So I can guarantee you in New York, there are organizers and activists that are still being targeted for being a part of mass demonstrations. The union has a lot to offer to that. Lots of power, lots of influence. We use it all the time to get stuff that we want, right? This is another example of how we could kind of throw down in that direction. I know in Oakland, we're working closely with SEIU around a direct action that a group of us did, and we're being targeted by our district attorney. They tried to extract and extort $70,000 in restitution from us, and are charging 14 people with criminal charges when throughout the Occupy movement, you know what I mean? People were demonstrating, camping out for months and months, and now folks have gone back to doing what they're doing, right? So that's a concrete way, right? We got our SEIU union to not only rescind an award that it had planned to give to the district attorney because she refused to drop the charges, but they're continuing to place pressure on them. And as we're coming up on the year-long anniversary of Black Friday, when we took that action in solidarity with Walmart workers and other low-wage workers, it's important that that's a concrete way to make connections. I think the other thing that can also and should absolutely happen is making sure that we're doing the work inside of the union to ensure that Black Lives Matter. So having those really sticky and hard conversations about why are there not more Black folks in leadership in this union, right? That's a big deal. And transforming from the inside means that we're also transforming what we do outside. So I know that there's task forces and such things that are being developed inside of SEIU, Racial Justice Task Force, where folks are looking at that question. But I do think that there's probably more that we can do, right? So those are two concrete ways that I would say we can take this from beyond a discussion to actual impact.
I just want to sum up. I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Professor Piven, Francis Fox Piven, for introducing this. I want to end with one note. It was a question I thought was relevant, saying how do we know that we're not just doing the same thing over and over again? There's a anecdote about Frederick Douglass that I think is germane. I think that we should always keep in mind. At the conclusion of the Civil War, Frederick Douglass meets with a group of abolitionists who have said they are now going to disband their organization because the Emancipation Proclamation has been issued. 13th Amendment has been ratified, and he says, and they say, well, we have achieved what we set out to achieve, and we are disbanding. And Frederick Douglass says, do you think slavery is over? He said very prophetically, best that we remain vigilant to see what new skin this old snake takes on. And I think that Douglass was right. You know, what he said was that this particular form of this may have been extinguished, but this human instinct to exploit continues. And I think that we should be mindful in recognizing our victories in terms of what perhaps one movement achieves, and it doesn't abnegate the responsibility of those who come after us. It's like, how long do we have to fight cancer? As long as there are people who have cancer.
Listen.
And I think that's where we can end on that note, and thank you for your participation.